All right, old school NBA fans, self-researched NBA facts. Got another video for you. As always, thanks to anybody who watches my videos, subscribes to my channel. I really appreciate it. Man, weather's getting cold here in the Midwest. This video here, what I want to talk about is, this is kind of the go-to for the LeBron media. And it's about how, Jordan played in a watered-down era. Okay, so when we say watered down, what are we talking about exactly? The fact that they expanded on the amount of teams, creating more bad teams? Are we saying that players got pulled off of other teams that weakened their benches? I'm not really sure what we mean by that. But the NBA has been expanding basically from 1962 on. I'll do just real quick. 1961, the NBA had 8 teams. It was basically the original 8 when they called it the NBA. I think it was in like 56 or whatever it was, 8 teams. By 62, there was 9 teams. By 67, 10 teams. 68, there was 12 teams. But at the same time, there was now the ABA, which had 11 teams. So you have 11 ABA and 12 NBA, which is 23 teams. Okay? In 1969, the NBA expanded to 14 teams. To go along with the 11 in the ABA, you now have 25 teams. And it was that way also in 1970. In 71, the NBA expanded to 17 teams. And the ABA still had their 11. That was at the height. There was 28 teams. That's more than after the 1989 expansion, when you had Miami and Charlotte in the 88, going into the 88-89 season, and then the 89-90 season was Orlando and Minnesota. So that would have made it a total of 27 teams. Well, like I said, in the 71, 72, there was 28 teams. In 73, the ABA retracted a team, so now it's 10. So now they're at 28. Still more than after the 1990 double expansion in the in 88-89 expansion drafts. So in 75 they expanded 18. In 76 still 18, and the ABA had 9 teams when the season started, but only ended up finishing the season with 7 because 2 of them folded up. Can't remember who they were. I think it was Spirit of St. Louis and Kentucky Colonels, but I can't remember. But anyway, so they absorbed 4 teams. It was Denver, it was San Antonio, it was the New Jersey Nets. They were called the New York Nets. They just called them the New Jersey Nets, and the Indiana Pacers. They absorbed those 4. That was in 77. So now they're at 22 teams. They expanded again one more team in 81 to 23. So all this expanding they did from 1962 through 1977, essentially going from, in 61 they had 8 teams. By 77 they had 22. So they expanded 14 teams in 16 years. So that's not watered down though, right? Even with the ABA running concurrently with the NBA. That's not watered down either. Never gets brought up at all. Only the 90s. Okay? And then, the 88, right before the 88-89 season, you had expansion. You had Miami and you had Charlotte. And then in 1989, before the 89-90 season, you had Minnesota and you had Orlando. Fair enough. And then in 1996, they added 2 more, Toronto and Vancouver. All right. So I've already shown you how the league just did nothing but expand. Well, let's take a look at who the players were that got pulled off these teams that causes this big uproar about watered down. Now, you're allowed to protect 8 players on your team. Now, typically, that's your core. Not many teams are diving into their number 9 and 10 and 11 players unless it's like a blowout. Maybe you got a rookie you want to see play a little, whatever, what have you. Well, here's Here's what happened to the 1988 expansion draft, okay? Miami, their first pick, they took Arvid Kramer from the Dallas Mavericks. He never even played for Dallas or Miami. He has no NBA career at all, okay? That's how much it hurt Dallas, all right? The next pick was Billy Thompson from the Lakers. In his 1988 stats, he goes for 1.6 points per game, played 9 games. His win share was negative 0.1 on 4.2 minutes played per game. Okay, does that sound like a big loss? I wouldn't think so. All right, the next pick was Fred Roberts from Boston. Oh, they snagged Fred Roberts. He was good for 6.1 points per game, 73 games, 13.9 minutes played. He was good for 1.9 win shares. Now, you don't think they could just go get somebody else in the draft, free agency, just the next guy down from the bench to replace 1.9 win shares in 73 games played? Pretty sure you could. The next guy is Scott Hastings. He averaged 2 points a game in 55 games at 7.3 minutes, 1 win share. John Sunvold from the Spurs, 8.1 points per game, played 52 games, 19.7 minutes. Actually, not bad. 1 win share. That's what he had. Kevin Williams from Seattle, 6.3 points per game in 80 games, 13.6 minutes played, 1.9 win share. So less than 2 games. Hansi Nad from Philadelphia, never played for either team. There was no big deal there. Darnell Valentine, 7.1 points per game in 79 games, 20 minutes played, 1.5 win shares. Earl the Pearl Washington, 9.3 points per game for the Nets. Now this is the 88 season stats. 68 games, 20.3 minutes played, 0.7 win shares. How about Connor Henry from the Kings? Oh boy, 4.7 points per game, 11.1 minutes in 39 games, 0.4 win shares. John Stroder, the last pick for Miami, 1.9 points per game, 41 games, 6.6 minutes, negative 0.1 win shares. So Miami, in their big expansion draft, drafted a total of 8.2 win shares from all these teams. Well, they have 12 picks. I mean, they drafted 12 players, an entire roster. 8.2 win shares. So it didn't really hurt the teams that the previous 23 teams. They weren't hurt by this at all. You might even been doing them a favor in some cases. How about Charlotte? I'll skip the points per game and the games played and the minutes played. I just want to show that as an example. I'll go right to the win shares. Del Curry. Look at Del Curry. Now, this was before he was, a good shooter and all that. Never made an all-star or anything like that. 2.0 win shares from Cleveland. Dave Hoppen, Golden State, 0.8 win shares. Muggsy Bogues. Now, he's a young player. He had a pretty good career. 2.3 win shares. But at the time, very expendable. I mean, they didn't even protect him. Mike Brown from the Bulls, 0.7 win shares. Ricky Green, he was 32 years old for Utah, 1.8 win shares. Mike Holton from the Trailblazers, never even played for Charlotte. Michael Brooks, never played for Charlotte. Bernard Thompson, 0.9 win shares. Ralph Lewis from Detroit, negative 0.1 win shares. Clinton Wheeler, 0.4 win shares. Cedric Toney, 0.3 win shares. So that's a total of 9.1 win shares across 12 teams. You don't think you could bring in just one guy a little deeper on your bench, or through free agency, or through a trade, or just the draft itself, and replace your 3/4 of a win? I think it's fair to say. All right. Minnesota got themselves Rick Mahorn. Rick Mahorn from the world champion Pistons. This is in 1989. He got 4.6 win shares. How bothered was Detroit by this? They were so bothered by losing Rick Mahorn that they won the championship the next year in 1990. Go back to back. Tyrone Corbin, pretty good player, solid, 5.4 win shares. Oh boy, that's about it. Every other player, Steve Johnson from Portland, he got 1.7. All the rest, Brad Lohaus, David Rivers, Mark Davis, Scott Roth, Shelton Jones, Eric White, Maurice Martin, and Gunther Benke, all either never even played for Minnesota or their win shares was under 1. How about Orlando? They snagged themselves Sidney Green with the number 1 pick ever in Orlando's expansion draft. Two win shares from the Knicks. Reggie Theus, actually a pretty good player from Atlanta. I'm surprised Atlanta didn't protect him. He averaged 5.9 win shares. That's the highest I've seen so far. Terry Catledge, he was decent, 3.3 win shares for the Bullets. Sam Vincent, the Bulls, didn't need him anymore. Apparently, he was a starting center, just not that year, but the year before. Starting center in '88. Starting center, 2.3 win shares. Otis Smith, 2.5. Scott Skiles ended up being a pretty good player. I think he still has the record for the most assists in a game. 1.3 win shares for Indiana, though. Jerry Reynolds, 1.6. Mark Akers, 0.9. Moreland Wiley, 0.2. Jim Farmer, 0.4. Keith Lee, 0.8. Frank Johnson, 0.6. This is what was watered down. These players, are we joking? Toronto got B.J. Armstrong as their number 1 pick in 1995. The Bulls didn't protect him. Why? They had Steve Kerr. They figured he could give you close to the offensive production off the bench. They had Ron Harper, so Armstrong wasn't going to start. Jordan's back in the fold. They didn't need Armstrong. They had guys like, Jed Bushler, of course, Tony Kukoc, Luke Longley, Pippen. Will Perdue became expendable. They traded him for Rodman. It ended up being a great idea, a great trade. They got a, massively better trade. But B.J. Armstrong in 1995 gave 8.1 win shares for the Bulls in 1995. They won 47 games. Jordan only was responsible for 2.3 win shares for that 17 games that he played. Okay, so where is the other 37 win shares? Pippen and Kukoc, Harper, Longley, Kerr, those kind of guys. Okay, well, they got 37 wins, right? Total of 37 win shares, all right? So the Bulls won 72 games. So that means pretty much, because I don't know anybody else on the team, Jordan and Rodman were responsible for 35 wins, just those two players. Pretty amazing. They didn't need B.J. Armstrong. They let him go, and they had the best season of all time. 72-10, what was it, 87-13, counting the playoffs. The best season ever. Didn't need him. They draft Tony Massenberg, 2.2 win shares. Andres Goldberg, negative 0.1. Keith Jennings, not bad, 4.2 win shares. He averaged 7.4 points per game in 21 and a half minutes. So he's probably their number, 7 or 8 player, whatever. D'Antonio Wingfield, no win shares. Doug Smith, 1. Jerome Kersey was getting older, 2.5 win shares. Zahn Tabak, 0.2. Willie Anderson, 0.7. Ed Pinkney, 1.6. A.C. Earl, negative 0.2. B.J. Tyler, negative 0.7. John Sally, Miami. He was on Miami, gave him 3.6 win shares. Didn't need him. Oliver Miller, he was backup center in the 93 Phoenix team. 3.1 win shares. They didn't need him. These are the players that the rest of the league let go. Didn't need them. Vancouver was horrible who they drafted. They took Greg Anthony as their number 1 pick, the Knicks backup point guard. 2.9 win shares in 61 games for the Knicks. Rodney Dent, never played in the NBA. Antonio Harvey, 0.4 win shares. Reggie Slater, 0.4 win shares. And then he got traded to Philly, so Vancouver didn't even want him. Derek Phelps, no win shares. Larry Stewart, half a win share. Kenny Gaddison, half a win share. Byron Scott, he's older by now. This is in 95, so he's probably about 33, something like that. 3.9 win shares. He was on Indiana at the time. Okay. Gerald Wilkins, he was injured the entire 1995 season, so he had 0. Benoit Benjamin, 2.2. Doug Edwards, 0.2. And Blue Edwards, he ended up being an okay player, 1.2 win shares. So the 12 players they drafted was a total of 12.3 win shares from the teams they drafted them from the year before. So here goes back to my point. All these alleged great players or good players that made the league watered down, that the rest of the team, all these teams protected 8 players and they let all the rest of them go. What did it do? What did it do? It didn't do anything. Now, let's get down to some business. All right. So they had the expansion draft in 88, right? So I'm just going to do the champions. The 89 Pistons were 6-0 against the expansion teams. They were 57-19 versus non-expansion teams. Now, based on the percentage of if there was no expansion and they just did randomly, 6 games with, the rest of the league, they would have been 61.5 and 20.5. So they got 1.5 wins more because of the expansion. Now, this didn't affect the top teams. The top 10, 12 teams, they were not affected at all. The playoff teams were the playoff teams. Nobody's going to argue that. The 1990 Pistons, they were 12-1 against the expansion because now there was 2 teams. I'm counting not only the expansion year, but the year before. So they were 12-1 against the 4 expansion teams, 47-22 against non. So had they played the rest of their schedule, filled it with non-expansion just randomly based on the winning percentage versus non-expansion teams, they would have been 55.9 and 26.1. So 56 and 26. It would cost them 3 wins in the regular season. The 1990 Pistons. That's what the difference was. The 91 Bulls. This is the biggest one. They were 13-0 versus expansion, 48-21 versus non-expansion. If you do the random filling in the schedule again with non-expansion teams, they would have ended up with a record of 57-25 versus the 61-21. So they got 4 extra wins. The Bulls would have won the championship with 57 wins instead of 61. That's the difference. Is that a big deal? I think it's not even a deal at all. The 92 Bulls, they were 13-1 versus expansion, 54-14 versus non-expansion. Again, if we did filled in the rest of their schedule with non-expansion, they would have been 65.1 and 16.9. So they got an extra 1.9 wins by playing expansion teams. Does that sound like a big deal to you? Again, sounds like no deal to me. The 93 Bulls, and now we're 3 full seasons away from the double expansion years. The 93 Bulls were 11-4 versus expansion teams. Versus non-expansion, they were 46-21. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. The 93 Bulls were 46-21 versus non-expansion teams. They were a 57-25 team. If they would have filled in the rest of their schedule, the 15 games they played against expansion, put that aside, and you just randomly played whoever at the rate that they were going versus non-expansion teams, the record would have been 56.3 and 25.7. So they gained 0.7 of a win by having the expansion teams. Does that sound like a lot to you? Yeah, it doesn't to me either. Okay, so moving along, we're going to go to the next expansion in 1996. Okay, the champion was the Bulls. So the Bulls were 72-10. They were 5-1 versus expansion teams, 67-9 versus non-expansion teams. What's funny about this one is if they would have filled it in and played at the rate they were going, they would have been a 72.3 win team, 9.7 losses. They would have been 0.3 of a win better if they didn't play expansion. I find that hilarious. So it had no effect at all. In fact, it had a negative effect. It's amazing to me. It didn't make the Bulls have a better record. They would have been better without playing the expansion teams. How about in 97, the second year with expansion? The Bulls were 69-13 versus expansion. Again, they were 5-1. 64-12 versus non-expansion. They would have been 69.1 and 12.9. So again, they would have been a tenth of a win better had they not played expansion and just played the non-expansion teams. Incredible. The 98 Bulls, so now this is the third season with expansion. The Bulls were a 62-20 team. They were 6-0 versus expansion, 56-20 versus non-expansion. So they would have been 60.4 and 21.6. So they gained about a win and a half because of the expansion, or versus the expansion, if you want to call it that. The last but not least, the 99 Spurs. I wanted to do somebody other than the Bulls. The 99 Spurs, the last champion of the 90s, 37-13 team. It was a weird year because of the strike and all that. But versus expansion teams, they were 3-1. Non-expansion, 34-12. So they would have been the same thing, 37-13, whether they played the expansion teams or didn't play the expansion teams. Because I think by then, I would say, this would be the fourth year of those two expansion teams. It's pretty much caught up, been absorbed, and now they're in the mix for, the playoff. I mean, they get McGrady and Vince Carter. They get Antonio Davis at one point. It was an all-star for him, I think in 2000 or 01, something like that. So, as you can see, the expansion really didn't affect much as far as the record of these teams. People say, oh, they got these bloated records. Really? I don't see it. The only one would be maybe the 91 Bulls had 4 more wins than they would have had they played the other teams, not the expansion. 92 Bulls, 1.9 wins better. 93 Bulls, 0.7 of a win better. The 96 Bulls would have been better off not playing expansion. 97 Bulls would have been better off not playing expansion. The 98 Bulls were 1.6 wins better, and the 99 Spurs were the same either way. So again, it's a ridiculous argument that I just don't understand what watered down means, I guess. Explain it to me in the comments, please. What does it mean, watered down? Because the players that were getting pulled off these teams in expansion drafts were no big deal at all. They affected nothing. In fact, some of the top players, Rick Mahorn, they won the championship without him. B.J. Armstrong, they had the best season ever without him. I don't know. These guys meant nothing. It didn't weaken their bench. It was like a wash. It didn't do anything. I don't understand it. It added more teams in the league, yes. And at first, there was in 1989-90 season, the second year of expansion, there was 4 teams with under 20 wins. That season, yeah, I could see how you could say, yeah, that's watered down, whatever. The whole rest of the whole decade of the 90s, there was never more than 2 teams with under 20 wins. And some of those was the Dallas Mavericks. They were winning like 13 and 16 and 17 and that kind of thing. So I just find it to be a flimsy, ridiculous argument with one goal in mind, to try to bring down Michael Jordan. No one has ever made a coherent argument to me about how the league was watered down and the Bulls benefited from it, or any team in the league benefited from it by winning more games, by winning championships. The competition was lesser. Yeah, the initial expansion teams, of course the competition was less. But overall, I would say it didn't do anything. The top teams were the top teams. That didn't matter at all. I mean, do you think the Boston Celtics, in the Pistons for that matter, in 1989, that it mattered? I mean, they were a good championship team. The next year, they even give you what the Pistons thought was their 9th best player. Here, take my 9th best player. Didn't matter. They won the championship again. How did it affect anything? I don't think it changed the course of NBA history one iota. I think all it did was it kind of hit the pause button so these teams like Miami and Charlotte and Orlando, they could draft Penny Hardaway and Shaq and Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson and Glenn Rice and Ronnie Cycli and those guys, to build the base of another, good quality team. Now, sure, you could have not had expansion and you could have put those players on the current 23 teams. Absolutely, sure. You could have done that. But at what point is the right number? People say Bill Russell, when he played with 8 and 9 teams, it was too few teams. And then when you have more than 23, it's too many. What's the magic number? In the 70s with the ABA, they had as many as 29 at one time. More than, Jordan played with until 96, which was the same. So I don't get it. If somebody could explain to me in comments, I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to rely on you guys for this one because I don't see it. The numbers don't bear it out. The rosters don't either. So anyway, that's all I got for this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. And that's it for now.